What's up everybody? Welcome to another video here at Blended Graphics. Thank you for joining me today for this Halloween special edition. Now, Halloween is one of my favorite holidays, so of course I had to do something special for this episode. Now, in my previous episode, in my video that I put on here, I added my process in my speed art to my submission for Benny Spooky Edit War for 2021. I wanted to do something a little bit different for the Halloween theme, and I wanted to put together a tutorial, so my motivation and my inspiration behind this video is the Pennywise clown from It. And if you're not familiar with that film, I highly suggest go checking that out. And what I wanted to do with this character specifically, I've seen a lot of videos out there and a lot of different creations of transforming someone into Pennywise, and I wanted to do my own little twist on it with adding a female subject and creating a Pennywise look onto this specific person. So that's what this video is all about. You're going to learn a lot of different techniques using this video, and I hope you really like it. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and check out this video. Alright, so here we are. I got a 1350 by 1080 canvas size. I'm using this lady here as my subject, and I got a couple of different pictures of her from Envato Elements. So we're going to pretty much use the body for this, and then on this picture here, I like the face and kind of the vibe she's given. So I want to use the face on this one. So I've lowered the opacity on this, so that way we can scale this up. We can do that by pressing Control or Command T and then stretching the endpoints there. Now I'm looking at the eyes, trying to line them up, but also more specifically looking at the neckline. And then make sure that that's also centered where I want it to be. So I went ahead and added a layer mask to this, and we want to use the select subject feature. Once we have that, we want to press Shift Command I to invert that, fill that with black so that way we just have our subject here. And now we're just going to touch up the edges, make sure that we don't have any jagged or rough edges. We want to make sure that they are nice and smooth. Alright, so for this other image here, instead of using the select subject feature, I'm just going to go ahead and use the pen tool because I just want to create a selection of the head and the neck area. So we're going to add a layer mask on there and slowly start to crop this out so we just have the head. Alright, so now that that is where it is, let's go ahead and create a copy of this by pressing Command J. We want to right click and turn this into a smart object and warp this just by the neck area, so that way everything is lined up the way it should be. Alright, so somewhere right here looks good, and then we want to go ahead and add a layer mask onto this copy now, and then using a hard round brush tip, just getting rid of that excess part of the neck that we don't need, and just blend this with our image that we have below. So we want to touch up this right side just a little bit more, make sure that's nice and clean. And then using a soft brown brush, let's go ahead and just blend these two skin textures together just a little bit better. And now that our subject is complete, let's go ahead and start with the collar first. I've made a few copies here, and I've already extracted this from the background to save us some time. We're just going to put this in the right spot here, scale this down a little bit, and then using warp to just try to kind of manipulate this so that it's forming and stretching over the shoulders a little bit here. And just make sure that it fits her nicely. Let's scrunch this up a little bit so we can see more of the shirt as well. And like I said, we're going to use a couple copies of this to help with the overall collar. Alright, so in here now we can add that layer mask, and we're just going to clean up some of the areas that we don't need, get rid of it by painting black on that layer mask. I'm using a hard round brush tip as well to make sure that those edges are nice and clean. I also want to go ahead and just get rid of some of this part here. I think it's excess, don't really need it. Alright, really good. I want to go back to the neck area for just a second so that way we can paint back some of that skin texture. So I want to find that top layer and paint that area in. And then let's make sure that we switch to a soft round brush first so that way that the blending looks a little bit more polished. Alright, so that looks a bit more seamless, which is great. And we can go ahead and continue on with this collar here. I want to add another one, but put it behind our subject. And same thing, let's go ahead and warp and scale this down a little bit. Alright, so somewhere like so should look nice, and then we're just gonna again paint black on that layer mask to get rid of the areas that we don't want. So we're just going to do this a couple more times to get the look that we're going for here. All right, and then lastly, we want to kind of fill up some of the gaps right here underneath her chin area. You can see the shirt's poking through, so I just want to add a little bit more on here. All right, so that looks good. And now let's go ahead and do the left side. All right, so this looks great. At this point, I want to use that same collar, but this time I'm just going to create a small selection of just a part of this to use for the shoulders and give that a little bit of ruffles as well. If you've seen the original Pennywise character, you know, I'm not going to match exactly the outfit that he has, but I'm going to try to do my own little cosplay of it and try to create something with a similar aesthetic. So I've created that selection, press Command J to create a copy of just that selection, and now we have this by itself. And I want to go ahead and create this into a smart object. Let's warp this so that way we can just make sure that it fits along the shoulder nicely here. And then we're going to do the same thing with the right shoulder as well. And just like our main collar area, we're going to do a little bit in the front, but then we're going to add some of that behind our subject as well, so it just looks a bit more full. All right, so for the pieces that are going to go in the back, instead of just creating a small selection, we're just going to bring this back, kind of place it somewhere around the shoulder area. And let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit so we can get a better idea to see what this looks like. And we're just, you know, experimenting, seeing what you like. And then at this point, once we have it into place, we're going to add a layer mask. Hit Command I so that way we can invert it. And then we're going to paint white to bring some of this back in. So it's just up to you and your judgment, using your eyes as best as you can to just see what looks good for this. All right, so let's go ahead and do the same thing now for the right shoulder. And this is a bit much, so I'm just gonna erase some of that there. Just this little section we'll get rid of. Okay, I think this will do. And now the last thing to complement our attire here, we're gonna add some red buttons. The original character kind of had like these little cotton yarn red balls that are on the costume, but for this, I'm just gonna use buttons instead and just place this right where the original buttons were. So we've got one here. Go ahead and press Command J so that way we can create a duplicate of this, and we're just gonna bring this one down a bit. But this is going to do it for the costume. So now this is where the fun begins here. We're going to start off with just the shirt, add a hue and saturation adjustment layer and clip it below. We're going to desaturate this quite a bit. Now this is not only going to affect the shirt, but the skin tone as well. But that's fine because we want to have a white skin tone. So somewhere right around here should be good. And we're going to do the same thing with the face this time. Add a hue and saturation adjustment layer to that. And let's go ahead and desaturate this. Obviously, it's going to affect all the hair and lips, which we want to bring back. So instead of keeping it like this, let's go ahead and invert the mask, Command I, and then now we're just going to paint white to bring back that white area of the skin tone. We want to preserve the color of the lips, the eyes, and the hair, so we're going to basically get rid of everything else and turn that white or a grayish tone. And then lastly, we just want to touch up the neck as well, make sure that's the same tone as the rest of the skin. All right, so going back to the face, below that hue and saturation adjustment layer, we're going to add a levels. And with this adjustment layer, we're just going to create a bit more contrast, so let's bring in the shadows as well as the highlight anchor points. Obviously, this is going to affect the hair and everything, so we're going to invert that mask and just paint white on the face. This way, it just kind of gives us a bit more of a dramatic feel in terms of lighting. And this will do it. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the face, and we're going to add a solid color adjustment layer. We're going to work on the lips. So let's find like a nice dark saturated red to use, and let's cycle through these blend modes here. I think the color burn is going to look nice. All right, we're going to clip that below, invert the mask, and just on the lips alone, we're going to paint this back in. Obviously, the pinkish salmon color that we've got going on right now is just not dark and deep red enough as our character has it. So this is just going to give it a very saturated look and make it pop. We're actually going to use the same color for the red on the nose, as well as those little lines that go around her face and past her eyes. But for right now, we'll just focus on the lips. And after this, we're going to touch up those eyes and change the colors of them. All right, so the lips are looking really good. Let's go ahead and add another solid color adjustment layer on top of this. And like I said, this one is going to be used for the eyes. There's a couple of ways you can do this, like you can change the hue and saturation. But for this, I'm just going to find like a nice orange, cycle through the different blend modes to use, and we'll work this route instead. So the linear dodge looks good. Let's turn down the opacity a bit. And then let's go ahead and invert that mask, and we're going to zoom in here just to make sure that we're nice and precise, and just paint back just right around the area here. And that way we can give it that nice sinister orange look, just like the original Pennywise clown has. All right, let's lower the opacity just a bit more. We're going to do a couple more solid color adjustment layers to just give it a bit more depth. So for this one here, let's add a different blend mode, and we'll stick with the maybe color burn. Invert the mask, and on this is just going to darken up those edges a little bit so we can have a bit more of a contrast between the edge of our eyes and then the white parts of them as well. This helps give it a bit of dimension too. So then lastly, we want to find just a little bit of a lighter tone to use kind of at the center point of that and make it a little bit more yellowish or like more of a light orange color. Same thing, cycle through these blend modes. It's up to you as to what you prefer. These are just kind of the ones that I liked best, and we're going with them. I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just at 10% opacity, painting this back in. There we go. So now these eyes are really starting to pop and look just like our original character. All right, let's go back to the face. And we're going to actually go up to filter, down to liquify, and we're going to go down to the mouth section. And right here where it says smile, we're just going to turn that up a little bit, and you can see it just starts to give her just a little bit this little cheeky little grin or the smile, kind of like she's up to no good. So we can see the before and after. Very, very subtle difference, but it does look nice. All right, so we're going to go ahead and convert this to a smart object after we've duplicated that group, and I'll tell you why. Because our original character doesn't have the eyebrows, so what we're doing here is creating a selection of that skin above, and we're going to use that selection to just get rid of the eyebrows. Now, I wanted to make sure that all of those adjustments were still on there. That's why I created that copy of the group and then created a smart object out of it, so it kind of compresses everything together. So right now we're just using the warp tool just to make sure that we're fitting it all alongside the eye and being careful not to bring back the original eyebrow. And then just like before, we can use a soft round brush to make sure that this is all blended together. What we can even do as well is add a new layer on top, sample some of these grays and white tones, and paint on top of it. So that way, again, that adds a different layer of blending to it. Perfect, so let's do the same thing with the left side now. Just using the lasso tool to create a selection, hit Command J to create a copy of that selection, bring that down into our group, and then we're just going to pull this down by pressing Control or Command T. Right click, we can warp this, make sure that it's fit all alongside the contour of the face, and then just blend these two together. Pretty simple process. And for this left side, I definitely found it a bit easier for me to just sample different colors here of the skin and paint some of this back. I'm using a very low opacity as I'm doing this. Just take your time, make sure that everything's blended together nicely. And she's looking great. Now, if you've seen the original character, he doesn't really have any eyebrows, but what he does have are kind of like these creases in the skin. So we're gonna add that on a little bit later. And there's a little fun technique that we're gonna do to do that. But for right now, we're gonna continue on. And what I wanna do now is just add some black right around the eye. So we've added a new layer. Using a soft round brush, using black as our tone here, at a low opacity, just painting some of this in just below the eye here, gives it a bit of a sunken look. That's what we're going for, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And right now, I am just kind of rushing through it and trying to do my best to get the best in terms of quality, but also not wasting too much of your time watching this as well. So if this is your original project and yours alone, go ahead and take your time and try to realize and think logically where the structure of the bones are and things like that and how the light is going to interact. With the eyes where I want them to be now, we're going to go back to that red color where the lips are, and we're going to start to paint on the nose first. So I'm switching to a hard round brush. Let's zoom in on the nose, and kind of at the base of the nose, I'm using the hard round brush for this since we have some very defined edges. But at the top here, I'm actually going to switch back to a soft round brush and fill this part in here. All right, so at this point, I just like to zoom in and out, kind of see the big picture, make some little adjustments here and there. We're just fine tuning this to make sure it's the look that you want. So a couple more seconds and we should be good with this. Just want to touch at this area here. And yeah, I think I'm happy with this. Okay, let's go ahead and create those little lines that go right above the eyes. And I want to use the same red, so I'm going to Alt or Option click on this solid color adjustment layer, drag it on top of the eyes, make sure that everything is filled with black. And with this, we're going to go to this little pressurized hard round brush tip, because what we want to do is we want to use this pen tool to create the shape and kind of the path. So we're just clicking, dragging, and then once we kind of get this up here, we'll right click, and then we're going to go to stroke path. Let's try that again. Right click, stroke path, make sure that the simulate pressure is on. And then we end up with something like this. So obviously whatever brush tip you have, the width of it, that's going to be the largest part in the middle. So just make sure that that is set first. And then I'm going to switch to a soft round brush to just kind of get rid of this right below here. I'm going to add some of that back in. We just want it to kind of fade and not be over the eye there. All right, so we're going to do the same thing for the left side. And I like to start on a little bit more in the center of the lips or to the right, because I want the middle part of the line where it's going to be the thickest to be right here by the cheekbone. So we're just going to click and drag, try to make sure that it follows the path of the corner of the lip. Right above the eye, we'll click and drag again. So if you're not necessarily happy with the shape, what we can do here is we can Alt or Option click on that endpoint there. And then Control or Command click on some of these angles. We can adjust the curve shape just to get it the right path that you want. So something like this. And once you're happy, you can go up and right click and then stroke path. And we want to, let's go back to our brush, make sure that the opacity is set at 100 there. All right, same thing, pen tool, right click, stroke path, make sure simulate pressure is ticked, hit OK, and there you have it. So when you're actually hitting the stroke path feature, make sure that white is your foreground color, because remember, we're bringing white, we're painting white on that layer mask of the solid color, so you want to reveal that red tone. What we're actually going to do now is apply the same exact technique for the creases for the eyebrows. So let's first add a new layer, and we're going to just find the right thickness and opacity that we want to use first. So maybe something a little bit thinner than that. And remember, it's the thickest part of the path. And we want to make sure that we switch that brush tip, and we're going to start to create the ridges here. So we'll start here, create a nice little high eyebrow ridge, click at the base, and we'll drag. And then kind of match where the same spot is on the left side. Then we're going to do that on the right, click and drag. And then at the end here, we can just drag this endpoint in a little bit, and then we'll hit this spot here. Once you've done that, go ahead and right click, and then we're going to do a stroke path. Again, make sure that the simulate pressure is ticked on. And we're left with something like this as a result. And at this point, we can add a layer mask and just do a little bit more fine tuning, switch back to a regular soft round brush, and just kind of blend some of this middle part here. So, you know, Pennywise doesn't exactly have a unibrow, so we'll just clean this up a little bit. And then we can even go to the opacity and just kind of decrease that a little bit so it's not very dark in the center. And we want to make it look a bit more realistic as a normal skin crease. So I think right around here is gonna look good. And at this point, we can add a new layer using white, and let's just add some highlights on here. Just emphasize that a bit. I'm working with the lighting direction of our original lighting levels of our picture here. There's no need to try to switch the lighting direction and just cause a bunch of hassle. So let's just work with what we got. And we're just kind of painting over some of those ridges like the cheekbones, the nose, eyebrow ridges. And again, the light is primarily coming from the left side of that original image, so we're just enforcing that and exaggerating some of those areas. So highlights and shadows is definitely something that takes a lot of practice to get good at. My biggest advice is to study pictures, study people, and how the light is interacting with the different facial features and what is getting a shadow, what's not getting a shadow. You know, really focus on that. Try to train your eyes and just practice on your own personal projects. That's how you get good at it. I by no means profess to be an expert in this field, but you know, if you see some of my pictures from a year or so ago, just the extreme difference between then and now is quite a big difference. So just practice. Practice makes perfect, or in this case, consistency. And since we've already done the highlights, we're doing the shadows now, and we're starting out with those eyebrow ridges. Just try to get more of a sunken look, working our way around the nose and things like that. Obviously, we're going to have more of a shadow casted on the right side since our lighting source is coming from the left, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm just going to take a few more seconds to continue to add some shadows. And then I will ultimately add a couple more little spots on the nose and lips just to add some little highlight spots on there. All right, so that looks good. Let's go back to our highlights now, and we're gonna just do a couple of dabs right here on the nose, just to kind of give a little bright spot right there, and kind of like a little reflection. And we can even sample that red, and instead of using white, just do a very, very faded red, kind of a pink tone, and go over some of these areas of the lips. And as a way to see some of that definition underneath of the lips, we're gonna actually double click on this layer, go down to blend if, and then we'll Alt Option click on those anchors to separate them. That way it just brings back some of those darker tones underneath in that definition. Alright, so I think this should look pretty good for us and what I have in mind for this tutorial, so let's go ahead and move on. And actually, there's a lot more shadows that need to be added on here, so I'm going to speed through this little section here to get through it, and I'll see you back in a second. Alright, so I'm happy with this. I want to go ahead and add shadows on the shirt itself. So I'm going to add an exposure adjustment layer, clip it below. Let's turn this down, invert it by pressing Command I, and we're going to paint white on this using a soft round brush to paint back. So essentially we need to have that interaction with the collar and the ruffles with the shirt, make sure that it looks cohesive. So I'm adding a bit of a shadow underneath, so that way, again, it just looks more realistic that way. The little spots here as well. And then what I even want to do is exaggerate some of the creases in the shirt itself. I just kind of like that high contrast look, so that's why I'm going over some of these areas and just exaggerating it and emphasizing it a bit more. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and make sure that that right side is a bit more dark and have more of a shadow than the left side. And even that arm, we can darken that up a bit too. And that should wrap it up. Let's take a look at that before and after. Very nice. All right, I like it. So just like everything else I've done before, once we've done the shadows, we're going to do the highlights. This time with the exposure, we're going to go the opposite direction. And let's go ahead and invert that mask once we have this. And now we're just going to emphasize some of these spots of the creases, again, just on the shirt, just to exaggerate that. So I'm just going to take a couple more seconds with this, go over some of those creases again, and then we can move on from here. And I think that's going to do it. Let's just go ahead and give this layer a title. And then I'm going to scroll back up a second, touch up her face just a little bit more with some of the shadows, maybe give it a bit more definition by the nose. So I really do try to exaggerate a lot of the times the contour and shaping of the physical features on the face, just because when you're looking at it up close, it looks fine sometimes, but when you're further away and it doesn't have that contrast, it does start to look a little bit blended together. So by increasing the contrast, it just reads much better when you're not looking at it so close up. And again, I'm probably spending a little bit more time on this than I should for the tutorial, but just to give you an idea of what I'm doing. So I think this is good for now, and we can go ahead and move on. Again, if this is your personal project, maybe spend a bit more time on this. Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and start moving towards the different ruffles, and we're going to start with this right shoulder here. Add some shaping and some different contrast to that because it's really bright at the moment. So let's fix these levels. We're going to use an exposure adjustment layer first, decrease this a little bit so we can darken up some of these areas. And we're starting with that back piece first. All right, so let's go ahead and group these together, give it a title. And if you right click that eyeball, we'll change the color to purple. I like to make sure that I'm organized with all of my stuff. And since it is a long process, really tedious, I'm speeding through this just because there's so many different parts of this and it's going to take some time. So I'll be back in just a second and I'll see you once I'm finished. Alright guys, I'm back and I'm really enjoying the progress that we're making here so far. So what I want to do now is I want to exaggerate the face a little bit more. We are kind of at the point where we can just start to fine tune things here. So I'm adding another layer for our shadows, and because we do have that light coming from the left side, let's darken up the right side just a bit more. Like I said, I just want to fine tune this. We are ultimately going to add texture onto the face right after this, so I want to make sure that the lighting looks good first before we go ahead and apply that texture. So let's just take a little bit more time with this. Again, if this is your project, take a little bit more time than what I'm doing, obviously, but I just want to show you kind of my approach to this as if it were my project. All right, so just right here by the neck can get a bit tricky, just because where the jawline is obviously going to be the darkest spot, but at the same time, you know, your images are connected together. So if you paint too far, you start hitting the neck. So, you know, try to be really careful with that. And at this point, let's go ahead and add this texture. So let's drag in this up here. It's just a cracked texture that I found, I believe on Unsplash, and we're going to use this for the cracking of the skin here. So let's play with our blend modes, stick with this top quadrant just because I think that's going to preserve the cracking the best. And honestly, it's just experimentation. I don't come in here and say, oh, I know exactly what I want to use. I just kind of cycle through, see what I like best. I want to shrink this down, rotate it a little bit, and maybe change the blend mode once more. Like I said, it's just personal preference, what you like. Maybe multiply, we'll stick with this one. Okay, and I'll rotate this just a bit more. We can even right click this, go to warp, and just make sure that the cracks are just kind of rounding out the face and not just completely flat. All right, so something like this, we'll hit that check mark, add a layer mask, invert it, and then we can go ahead and just use a soft round brush, add a low opacity, and just start painting some of this back in, slowly fading in that cracking texture. All right, let's zoom in here so we can see a bit better what we're doing. And again, less is more. You don't want to overdo this. It can start to look a bit tacky. So just try to make sure that we're keeping the texture very subtle. And I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Command J or Control J. And this is just going to help exaggerate those cracks a bit. We can lower the opacity so it's not so powerful and overbearing. So something right about here. Maybe lower it just a bit more. Okay, I think this will do it. And after I group these together, we're going to do the same thing to the arm. So let's turn on this other layer here, put it into multiply, Controller Command T. Let's scale this down a little bit, move this to the right, add the layer mask and then invert that. And then painting white using a soft round brush, we're just going to bring back that cracked texture. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and do the left side now. Same thing, multiply, scale it down. And what I'm not doing on the arms is warping it, just because I don't have a lot of area to work with. I don't think you need to warp it, so I'm just keeping it flat on there and then just painting this back in, and that should be just fine for what we need it for. All right, so this texture is looking the way I want it to. I'm going to lower the opacity on this. And before we touch up the hair, what I want to do is go to the main body image and let's click on that layer, Command J to duplicate that, turn it into a smart object. This way we have one backup. And on this layer, we're going to add some Gaussian blur. Because right now the arms, the edges are very nice and crisp and clean, and it looks a bit unnatural. So I've added about 3 pixels of Gaussian blur, inverted that mask, and along the edge here, I'm just at 20% opacity. We're going to paint that in so it just has a bit more of a feathered edge to it, and just, again, just more realistic and more natural. And honestly, this is really just a small detail, but you know, over time your eyes start to develop a bit better when you're looking at things like this, and it's worth just taking that extra second to just kind of refine this and give it that little bit of extra detail. All right, friends, let's go ahead and start moving up to the hair. We're gonna start adding some of that in. And I wanna go to the brush settings first, use a hard round brush tip for this. We can kind of bring down the hardness just a little bit. So if you have a pen tablet, go ahead and use the pressure sensitivity. That'll help look really nice. We're gonna add a few layers here. I like to have a dark color, medium color, and a light color to sample the different strands of hair. So I'm zooming in here and we're just gonna see what the thickness of the size looks like right now. So I'm at 100% opacity. So that's a bit too thick and the darkness is too dark of a color. So let's change up the color as well here, something a little bit lighter. And if you use the left bracket key, that'll decrease the brush size. And at the top of the head here, you can see we're just following the shape and contour of the direction of where the hair is going, adding some strands of hair, because right now the original image, the edge was very rough. So this is gonna help paint some of that back in, look a bit more realistic. Hair can be a very difficult thing to cut out. So a lot of the times this is what I do to compensate for that. And when I'm working with the hair, I always start with my darker colors first and then build on top of that. I find that that gives the best outcome if you start it with the darker colors first. But again, this is a very tedious process and we're just gonna follow the shape of the hair, add some strands of hair. And because this process would take for another extra hour if I continue to do this, I'm gonna actually skip over this to our final result of adding all those different hairs in. If you want to see a more in-depth look of how I do some hair retouching or skin retouching, go ahead and check out my Fall Girl tutorial, and that will focus a bit more in that area if that's something that you're interested in. But in the meantime, here is our final result of the hair, and after we've added all of those different strands on there. Alright, but basically we're done here. What I'm going to do now is just some final things here. I'm going to work with the buttons, add a little bit of shadow from underneath that. And then we can add an exposure adjustment layer on top of the buttons itself. Make sure that it's clipped on there. We'll just lower that. And then we're going to invert that mask and paint white on the right side so that way we can reveal some of that shadow. Alright, let's just kind of see how things look from afar. Lower the opacity. Alright, let's take a look at the before and after on that. And we can lower the opacity, maybe just a bit more on that. Okay, good. So we're going to add a background, and this background here, I want to desaturate this by adding a hue and saturation adjustment layer. I thought this was a nice, cool, and creepy background and fits with the theme, so we're using this. And on a new layer above that, we're going to just paint some black on the right side here. Again, the light's coming from the left, so we want to darken the right side just a bit. Alright, maybe we'll go ahead and hit E on the keyboard there, and then we'll just erase some of this. We'll switch to a saffron brush. In fact, what we can do is add another layer on top of this. And we can switch up our color as well. Find like a nice dark gray tone, and we'll just softly paint this on the left side. This will just help soften that texture a little bit. I want our subject to be our main focus. So that's why I just want to soften up the texture in the background. And maybe we'll not do that bright white. Let's switch up the color so we have just a lighter gray instead. This will help with our light and give the illusion that we do have some light coming off the canvas on the left a bit. Alright, so that's going to do it for our background. Let's go ahead and group all of that together, highlight them all, Command G to group them. And I'm going to turn off the background because I just want our subject to be visible. And at the very top, we're going to add a new layer, merge everything together at that layer at the top because I want to be able to add some global highlights and shadows. So I've turned our background back on, and we're starting off with the shadows first, and we're clipping it to our subject. So starting on the right, we'll add some shadows, and like I said, we're doing some overall global lighting to this. You can always do like an exposure or levels adjustment, darken it, invert the mask. You can always take that approach if you want. Up to you. So I've noticed that once we've kind of added all those layers together, we've got some funny glows going on in the arms here. So I just want to erase that real quick. Make sure that we take care of that. Both shoulders. All right, good. So on a new layer on top of our background, we're going to add just some atmospheric fog and different hazy effect on here. Just kind of set the mood of this mysterious and eerie horror theme that we've got going on. And this is something where you don't have to add it if you don't want to. I just think it adds a nice little extra element to it. But anyways, we're at the point where we can just merge everything together at a new layer on top. So Command Shift Option E or Control Shift Alt E. We're going to turn it into a smart object and go to our camera raw filter. We'll make some final adjustments in here. I'm going to start off in the basic. Just add again more contrast to this. We're not going to add a lot. So maybe increase our whites a bit more too. And maybe just saturation, not too much there. I just want to boost up the colors a bit. But we can actually go to the color mixer here. And then in the orange, we'll just increase the brightness on that, mainly thinking of the eyes when I'm doing this. So just very subtle stuff. I don't want to be too overbearing with the red, especially on the hair. Let's see what the yellow does. Maybe not too much. We'll just leave it there. And let's go down to our effects. I'm curious to see what the vignette will do. I won't do that. I want to preserve the lighting on the left, but we can add some grain on here. And then we can go up to the detail, add some sharpening. Actually, you know what? Let's not do the sharpening. I'll do that on a separate one. We'll hit OK. And what I want to do is go ahead and duplicate that layer, convert that to a smart object. And this will be the sharpening. So we'll go back into the camera raw filter. And we'll go back to the detail here, and let's increase that sharpening. And then by the masking, we can go down just a little bit as well, increase that. And what I'm going to do is invert that mask, and just on the face, let's make sure we have a soft round brush here. just on the face is where I really want to increase the sharpening. And we can even travel up to the hair, maybe exaggerate some of those details a bit. And I want to get the arms too, just because I want to see some of that cracking texture. But other than that, guys, this is pretty much it. We are done. So I did spend another hour or so just trying to fine tune it a little bit more, add a bit more detail, add a bit more color and light to it, as well as add that iconic balloon. And this was the final picture that I did come up with at the end. Wasn't really sure to add color or not. I had mixed emotions about it, so I'll let you be the judges whether you like the new additions or not. If you like these tutorials, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, give it a big thumbs up, and I hope to see you again for our next tutorial. And until then, I wish you all a very happy Halloween. See you next time. Take care.